All right. We are back. Thank you so much for those who stayed. This is our last talk for today, and we will be talking about the future of work, how remote work is shaping the global workforce. So the first few talks that we've been discussing, we were kind of more focused about freelancing within the Philippines, and then with Trish, we talked about the recruitment process and showing up in the interviews. It's more about us. But this time, this talk that we reserved for the last, we kind of want to look outward, right? So now that we know all about this amazing things about working remotely, how will this change us? How is it going to affect us as a country, as a nation, as globally? How will it affect everybody? So I have here with me three amazing women, you know, making impact and making changes, each and every one of them. And I'm gonna go ahead and start introducing from, there's no particular order, right? So I'm gonna start with Zaina. Zaina Xavier, you are from Kinsta and she has been helping international startups and scale-ups with their HR needs for over a decade. And she's focused on creating great environments that allows people to flourish and do their best work. So currently, Zaina is the head of HR for Kinsa, right? And Tracy, a very special place in my heart. I actually work with Tracy. She is the co-founder of Grow Remote, doing amazing things in Ireland. She'll tell us a little bit more about that, in a while. And basically, they are helping people make remote work normal, or remote work local. Sorry, our tagline, I forgot. But basically, we are going to be talking about what's the impact of remote work in Ireland as well, right? And Marjorie is an automatician. He actually works for Automatic, and born and raised in the Philippines. She's a true testament of Filipino world-class talent. And I invited them all here so you can see an example, like broaden your outlook, not just within our country, but outside as well. So, ladies, I want to give you a chance to speak up, so it's not just me. Let's go ahead and start with, well, I'm going to go back to the order. Zaina, you can go ahead first.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for having me today, June. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Tracy.
Hi, so I'm Tracy. As June said, I'm co-founder of Grow Remote. In Ireland, we started off as a non-profit that help communities to grow and thrive, and we use remote work to do that. So we concentrate on employment, and we make remote work both visible and accessible in local communities across the world now. We're in 17 countries, and we were volunteer until September of last year when we got in a full-time team because we got funded by the Irish government, which was very exciting. So Ireland is our really biggest base. We've got 70 communities all across Ireland, mostly in rural and regional Ireland. And then beyond that, we're dotted across the world. Thank you, June, for having us.
Thank you for coming. Marge?
Hi, I'm Marjorie Asturias, and I'm Director of Growth R&D at Automatic. So Automatic is the parent company of WordPress.com, but you might also know some of our other products like Jetpack, Akismet, WooCommerce, and Tumblr, as well as other fine software products. I am currently based in Colorado in the United States, but I was born and raised in the Philippines. So mabuhay sa mga kababayan ko sa Pilipinas. Super happy to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and talk to you more about Automatic. We are, again, a fully remote company, has been since 2005, our founding. We have a little over 1,300 employees in, I believe, 77 or 78 countries around the world, including quite a few in the Philippines. I think maybe 10 or 12 in the Philippines. We'd love to see more, though. So I hope that this opportunity, talking to you and sharing our story with your audience, encourages more Filipinos to work for Automatic.
Right. Great, ladies. Okay, I'm gonna go on with the questions, right? And let me start from the top. So companies like Automatic and Grow Remote and Kinsta have been remote from the beginning, right even before COVID hit, we were already remote. So that we had a huge head start when it comes to hiring remotely. And so because our audience right now are mostly talent, they're job seekers, we want to know, like, what is it that you look for when you're hiring for people?
From my perspective, I think it depends a lot on the role. There'll be very specific skills we're looking for, and they're in our job descriptions. We give you all the answers of what we're looking for. We're not trying to trip people up at all. But on top of that, there's also the values that we have. We've just been through a big process at Kinsta around looking at our values and what makes us unique and what we want to keep as we grow. And it's all around kindness and respect, and our customers being the center of what we do and delivering great quality. So you can usually find all of those on the websites. And I would guarantee you that during the interview process, there'll probably be some questions designed to assess those competencies for all companies, and they'll probably have their values on their websites too.
Thank you, Zaina. Tracy, you were recently hiring.
You are, yes. Yeah. Oh, so Grow Remote, back to our culture, we're about bias for action. So we're really looking for doers. But then specifically, I'm going to flip the question kind of a tiny bit and go into what we're hearing from employers on building a remote ready workforce. And there are really two things that I think are really interesting. So first is knowing enough about remote work to know whether or not it's for you and where to find it. So knowing companies like Automatic, GitLab, knowing their names, who they are, a little bit about them. And then as you go forward, one of the biggest kind of skills areas is written communication. So are you really strong on written communication? Something that I had to improve consciously because you're not used to it in the old way of working. And so I guess those are the two things. To flip your question a tiny bit, June, sorry.
All right. Oh, that was very good answer. Marjorie, a lot of people would want to apply to Automatic. What are you looking for?
Yeah, and actually, if you are interested, you can go to automatic.com. That's mattic.com, and click on the Work With Us page. We have a lot of jobs open. And to kind of echo what Zaina had said, obviously the skills that we're looking for are kind of dependent on the role. We have everything from developers, programmers, to support engineers, content people, SEO, marketers, the vast gamut of roles. But in particular, when we're hiring, we have a fairly unique hiring process in that we have interviews that are both held on Slack as well as over Zoom. And then we also go through a trial project, and that's for any role, regardless of whether it's on the executive level or the support engineer. Everyone goes through a trial process where we assess your skills, and it's a paid trial. This is not a free, you're not working for us for free. It is a paid trial, but it's a way for us to assess your skills and a way for you to decide if this is the right fit for you. And mutually, it's a way to determine how well you would work in a remote distributed workforce, because it does take, a lot of autonomy, a lot of self-motivation and discipline when there's not someone hanging over your shoulder telling you what to do. Written communication is very, very important. We do require that everyone is very proficient in English, and someone who is very self-motivated, very disciplined, and also is used to, and it's really hard to describe, but when you're you should be able to communicate not only synchronously, where you and I are having a conversation right now, but also asynchronously, where you're having a conversation without the expectation, especially over Slack, obviously, that person will not get back to you right away, but they will eventually. So there are a lot of folks who think that remote would be great. They can do whatever they want, have a flexible schedule, but it is kind of a different work style and requires a different way of approaching the way you work and the way you communicate. So those are the things we evaluate throughout the entire hiring process.
Right. That's really good to know. Guys, take notes. Right. So moving forward, so we've talked about that most of our audiences are job seekers, and I think I'm not just speaking with the Filipinos, but in general, a lot of them don't know where to find these jobs, right? So what would be your suggestions to these people? What would be your tips? How can they take advantage of these jobs out there?
Well, there are loads of great remote jobs boards out there. We advertise a lot on We Work Remotely. Remote.co is another one that I used to look at. I was going through this process about a year ago, and I knew I wanted to work at a remote company. So I actually bookmarked probably about 20 companies. Kinsta was one of them, Automatic was another, that I really wanted to work for. And every week I would just go through that list of bookmarks and check their careers pages, because some of them will be smaller companies like Kinsta. We only have 150 people. And so there's not a huge budget to advertise on lots of different platforms. We'll only do that with certain roles. So it's worth it just to check the careers page every week. If you bookmark them all, it's super quick. And people will always advertise on their own career pages, in my experience.
Thanks, Zaina. Tracy, what would be your tip?
So finding remote work is the biggest issue, right? So companies are always speaking about the power of remote work and economic impact, etc. If you go into the communities that need the help the most, they have never heard of Automatic, never heard of GitLab, like completely new thing. So there's a couple of things. One is that find other people who are looking too. So sometimes you can get caught up in people who are paid to tell you certain things. So different parts of the machine have different paywalls in front of information. If you find a set of peers who can support you, you can share information as you're going. It can be really noisy. So you're like, who are Automatic? Who are Kinsta? Like, you've never heard of these before. And everything is so new. So having support along that. Grow Remote, we built a free mini course on finding remote work. Everything you need to know is in there. We actually have an Airtable with all of the companies who hire remotely, plus their careers pages. So you have those kind of bookmarked. And then the 3 jobs boards that we say, because it's based around Europe, is We Work Remotely, EU remote jobs. And I've forgotten the last one, I can't remember. But anyway, so there's kind of very specific ones that allow you to just, the most important thing as well is that you're no longer looking by country, although it can be by country, you're looking by time zone. So one of the biggest issues that we found in our communities is that in Ireland, say we're not a very big island, obviously, but you have very local communities and then cities. You've got 3 minor cities, but people search for jobs by the area that they're in. And they had to go through a little bit of a shift to now search by a time zone or fully remote. And the other shift that we had to make in the terms of mindset of people within these communities is we always understood remote to be remote from a city and very local to us. So when organizations would announce 10 jobs in some area, it's satellite offices or hub and spoke. We weren't used to remote being fully distributed. So this concept that the jobs could be here, I'm rambling a little bit, but find people who are also on the journey with you so you get straight information. That's it.
Yes, really good advice. The power of community is what we are. Right. Marjorie, what would be your suggestion?
Well, obviously for Automatic, go to our website, click on Work with Us. I'm glad that Zaina mentioned We Work Remotely, because that's pretty much the first one that came to mind for me when it comes to remote work. We have advertised on LinkedIn. We've advertised on, and one of the things we want to do is, because we have a global audience, we are trying to encourage more people from outside of the North Americas. We still hire within the North Americas, but we really want to continue expanding our footprint around the world and really emphasizing diversity and inclusion. And so we are also trying to reach out to different organizations and share, sharing what job opportunities we have for those who might not think of us when they think of a tech company. And also for specific to, if you're interested in WordPress, and if you're familiar with Kinsta and Automatic, you're probably whether you're in the WordPress community or adjacent to it. It's a little bit different this year because of COVID, but historically, WordCamps and WordPress meetups are a fantastic way to connect with others in the WordPress community. And there's almost always a jobs board at WordCamps that will display not just on-premise job roles that are open, but also remote companies. The WordPress community seems to be pretty advanced when it comes to thinking about the future of work, and there tends to be a lot of remote opportunities in that space.
Right. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of connect with other people, right? Bookmark those jobs boards to make them easier for you to access, and just network and connect with people who are also looking for the same thing. Yes, really great answers, ladies. Our next question is basically, so the pandemic accelerated the digital adoption of most businesses, right? So like if there were 500, let's just say, I'm just throwing a number here, 500 companies before who were hiring remotely before pandemic, that probably increased 200% now, like because we can't work, or it's very difficult for us to work. So in the office. So how do you think this will change for other countries? How will this affect the countries, like its people? What would be the overall impact of this?
Well, I think it's a really interesting social experiment. So we're in a really unique time at the moment, and we don't really know what our new normal is going to be like. But I expect that we'll see at least some companies will continue this in future years. And June, we've seen a lot in Lisbon already. There's a really high wage difference between the people who work for international companies and the people who work for local companies, and that creates a big discrepancy between things, and pushes things like rent prices up. It's really hard now for Portuguese people to find affordable accommodation in Lisbon. So I think that's an interesting sort of social side to it, and something that we need to be conscious of, because remote companies will have different compensation strategies, and that's something we're looking at now. Do we pay people the same amount regardless of where they're based, or do we localize salaries a little more? So I think that's something that I'm personally finding really interesting at the moment. But I do think as well that once we move past this period in our history, there is, I see, and I don't know if you guys feel this too, a little bit of a backlash against remote work from some companies for people who weren't ready to be thrust into it. Companies like the ones on this call, we're all doing it already. But there are some companies that just didn't have that documentation, that technology, that mindset already set up. And so they've been thrust into a remote work environment and they're not really ready for it. So I think once people are able to go back to the offices and work from there, I do think we'll see, there will be a shift definitely towards more remote work, but I don't know if it will be as profound perhaps as it could have been.
Right. Very interesting. Tracy, what would be your opinion?
For us, ultimately, it has the power to reshape how local communities run. So if you can bring in people with equal access to jobs that you can have in a city, and they can spend both their time and their money locally, then we can build our farmers markets and do all the things that we want to do in our local community. So it's ultimately transformative. But we're paid by the Irish government to hit 4 objectives. And one of those is transition organisations from in-office to remote. And just before I left my last job, I was in Ireland's largest bank embedding remote work in the organisation. And so you can see the challenges that are within large enterprises that haven't had the opportunity to, I suppose there's models for fully remote, there's models for in the office, but this thing of transitioning a huge 250-year-old beast into something that's like location agnostic is mental. So I think we are coming up against challenges. I think together with the Irish government, we set up a training program to build capacity in organizations to be able to manage remote teams. And as part of that, we're seeing where things might go. I think that we have an opportunity now, ahead of hopefully the vaccine coming in and things going back to normal, to either lock in really good behaviours and kind of define what the future might be. So we're working on a change mechanism for that. But what I will say is the biggest thing that we're noticing in working with large organisations is that they say the future is hybrid, but they understand hybrid to be 2 days in the office, 3 days out. So they're like, oh, it's just going to be the same as it was before. It's just that you can do it. I'm like, no, you're going to have second-class citizens. It's going to be, that's going to be way worse. Like, just go back in the office if you want to do that. So it's I think the work that all of the remote companies doing and sharing their learnings is so pivotal, and it's amazing. We've shared that GitLab handbook maybe 1,000 times, and it's like, you need to go remote first. And they're like, oh, and even just last week, the CEO of a large company who was like, yeah, okay, we need to go fully, go all in. The pin kind of only dropped on remote first. He's like, everybody has to change. Like, yeah, if one is remote, all are remote. And I think that concept of inclusivity, I think that's working really well. So it's not that you're better in the office, you're better outside the office. It's just that you think about people everybody when you're doing things. And so everybody feels included, and you get all the benefits of remote work as well. So I'm not totally optimistic about the future, but I don't think, like, our job is to drive change in society. So we need to be a little bit, I think we've got a little bit of work to do. And I think that change will come for 3 levels. To finish off, like within organizations, you've got all colleagues and people coming into the organization and what the market is pushing in terms of what employees want, but they've been screaming for remote work for ages. Then you've got people managers who kind of enable it within an organization, but then you have CEOs, real leaders in traditionally office-based organizations, who need to kind of set the vision forward for a world where employment is accessible to you no matter where you are. That's it.
Great answer, Tracy. Right. Okay, Marjorie, what would be your opinion about it?
I agree with everything that Tracy and Zaina said, and I would especially highlight what Zaina mentioned earlier, that I also am unsure of how much of a transformative experience the pandemic will have on the nature of work. When the lockdowns first started happening and everyone had to suddenly go remote overnight, we got a lot of requests from media and from other companies that were all of a sudden realizing, oh my gosh, I have to turn my entire 5,000, 10,000 company into a remote workforce overnight. Can you give us some tips? And I remember attending a conference, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, that was about remote work, and most of the questions were things like, do you wear pajamas while you're working? Do you work from your bed, or do you have an office? And the questions last year was, well, what tools do you use? Can you tell us, like, how do I relate to my prospects, to my sales managers, to my workers? Can you tell us, how to use Slack, how to use Zoom? And it took a while. We were trying to share the message that it's not so much the tools. The tools are there to support you, but it really is, to echo Tracy's point, it really requires a big culture mind shift. You need to be remote first. You can't have one person remote and everyone else can stay in the office, because it really fosters a sense of exclusion for that one person. Because I think everyone has had an experience of calling into a conference call in a conference room where you're the only one calling in and everyone is in the conference room. And pretty soon people forget you're in the meeting, and you don't feel like you can participate. So it's about changing the way you think about what it means to actually be working. If you don't see the person in front of you, are they really working? And if, can you trust that they really work? Here at Automatic, we assume positive intent, and we assume that you're working. One of the questions we often get asked is, well, how do you know if someone's actually working and not? Trust me, it doesn't matter if you never see that person, if they're not producing results, because that's how you're measured in a company like Automatic. If you're not producing results, it becomes really obvious very quickly, no matter what your role is. So, things like trust, things like structuring the work so that you are results oriented rather than how many hours you put in, whether you see that person face to face. It requires so much of a grounds up shift in your workplace, your culture, your management style. Tools is one thing, your choice of tools, but really it's a cultural transformation, and it's not going to come overnight. We are still a company that's still trying to figure things out. I think we're a little bit ahead of a lot of companies because we've been doing it for so long, and we're more than happy to share our experiences. But it is something that it's, like I said, it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. Rome was not built in a day. Was that the expression? Or overnight or something like that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's huge benefits to it. And, there's environmental benefits, there's social benefits. But again, it's going to take a while, partly because it's a huge shift in the way we think about how we work and communicate.
It is a social change, and it affects so many areas, in society, just like what Zaina said, there could be the way that it is affecting Portugal is completely different, and the way it is affecting in Ireland and the way it is affecting in the Philippines. So it's so interesting to see how this actually is kind of bleeding out in other areas of our society. But work is very crucial, in our day-to-day life. So I guess that is kind of expected that would happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if you don't mind my interjecting, but you mentioned that work is very important to our day-to-day life. But when you're working from home and you're in Zoom, your day-to-day life, I mean, your work, you can see that it's part of a day-to-day life, but it's not all of your life. And so one of the things that that I joke about sometimes is when work from home became sort of the norm over the pandemic, you'd see these articles coming out about, how to make sure that your children behave while you're in a Zoom call, or how to create these virtual backgrounds. And at Automatic, it's such a fundamental part of our culture that, of course, you have a life outside of work, and you're going to have kids, and I have dogs, and my dogs sometimes go in and out of my Zoom conference calls, and I don't even notice. Sometimes they'll bark, and I'll hear kids in the background, and it's normal. It's not something anyone within the company ever questions, because that's all of our circumstances. So, and so it's interesting, funny, but also, I'm a little sad sometimes to see that people are like, oh, well, how, I need to put on a full face of makeup and make sure that my entire background looks like I'm in an office, when everyone knows you're at home. Right. So to be kind of authentic and genuine and blend those two things within your everyday life. I would love to see a future where if your child is right behind you drawing something, and while you're in a business meeting, no one bats an eyelid.
Right. Exactly. To normalize it, basically. Right. Yes, that's what we all want. I do want that. All right. Last question, ladies. So in the Philippines, not just in the Philippines, in a lot of other places in the world as well, internet is our number one roadblock. Okay, it's a really big challenge for us. And sometimes you feel kind of helpless, because it's not something one person can change, right? But in your opinion, and I'm sure this is just our opinions, but what can we do collectively to change that? Because in the future, this is going to be, if we are going to go grab global opportunities for remote work, and internet is the lifeblood of remote work, if our internet is bad, we're already behind, right? That's the thing. So how do you propose we change this? What can we do collectively?
Personally, I find that a really tough question. I'm not sure. My only thoughts really are that I agree with you that a stable internet connection that's quick is really essential for remote work. And we're sympathetic. We're a nice company. We understand sometimes things happen. I'm sure all remote companies are the same. But if generally speaking you don't have a good internet connection, it's going to be really hard to get a good remote job. But I have no knowledge of how we can make that better. So maybe Tracy or Marjorie can help me out here.
No, that's a really hard question. John Reardon is on our board. He's chairperson of Shopify International, and he's chairperson now of our board. And he was on a call recently, and his internet cut off. We're like, yes. So it never happens, but it happened once. So you laid forth, I think, an assumption there around connectivity is the biggest issue. In our experience working particularly with rural and regional communities, where that was the presumption that internet connectivity was the biggest issue, it wasn't. It's kind of like electricity. So you can have electricity coming into a house, my best analogy that I have, but if you don't have switches or know what a light bulb is, you're not going to notice any difference in having electricity. So what we found is even when towns and villages got connected, there was a huge gap between that and being able to use it for what the power of the internet could bring to you. So what we did in Ireland to get around that issue was, again, funded by the government. They set up a fund to set up co-working spaces. So they would fund you to build a co-working space in the middle of if you go to a field in Ireland, you might find a co-working space. They're just everywhere. But it's really, really good, because what it does is allow, and they're really kind of flexible. So they're not just open working. They'll change, then adapt their space to suit what you need, because it is kind of smaller density areas as well. But what it does is bring everybody together often in the main village or whatever else it is, and that can be good for bringing vibrancy back. It's not as good as if it was in your house, but it's probably not more than 5 or 10 kilometers away from where you are. So I think that was a good it was a good compromise between the two. But for us, the narrative around broadband is the biggest issue, keeps people's eye focused on something that, again, you can't control, you can't change that, but you can create a co-working space and get a remote job. Both of those two things are within your control. So that's my answer on that.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer, Tracy, because I'm basically in the Philippines. We also have, I wouldn't say like, I'm not sure if maybe DTI can correct me or if I'm wrong, but we do have co-working spaces, in cities, in smaller towns and whatnot, right? And so the thing is, we kind of focus on like the internet is slow in my house, so that's why I can't access it. But actually, they can go to the nearest co-working space and work from there, right? And the internet will probably be a lot better than where you are, and the co-working space is probably like a walking distance or much.
Yeah, and it's not ideal. Like, I know there's one, I remember the first time we opened up in a city, and I was like, why, what do you want with remote work? Like, and I remember we met a woman, Orna, and she was a single mother. Her kids were old enough that she could work like in the house and they could entertain themselves, but not old enough that she could leave the house and she'd be comfortable with them there. So for her, being able to work from home was important. But as we look to kind of make some sort of progress, with what we can do at the moment, it is the best that we can get to.
Right. Yeah. The workaround at the moment while they're working on the pipes, right? And the internet connection. Marjorie, what would be your take?
Well, obviously if we're talking about broadband connection in order to promote remote working, and actually just in general, developing your business industries, regardless of whether you're remote or you're on premise, your industries really need reliable, strong internet connection. But I would challenge people to think about what it means to have fast internet connection, because now, granted, I do have fast internet here at home, but I have been to the Philippines. I was in the Philippines in December for a couple of weeks, and I was in a very remote village. That's where my mom is from. I don't know if anyone listening is in Calapan, Oriental Mindoro, but I spent a couple of weeks there, and there was some slow internet, there was some fast internet, but there was internet. And if you can access Facebook, you can work remotely. A lot of what we do at Automatic is Slack chats and just working on a Google Doc. Yes, there are Zoom calls, but it's not required to do your work. And there are certain workarounds you can do in order to maybe improve your Zoom calls. You can turn off your video, or again, you can go to a co-working space. Or if, for those automaticians who they're not able to get on Zoom for whatever reason, you can ask your teammates, hey, can we just do this over Slack? There are a lot of different ways you can, again, doing the workarounds. But we have automaticians who have worked off of cruise ships, and cruise ships are not well known for having fast internet. I have worked off of cruise ships. I have worked off in a hospital that had very poor broadband. So this is not to discount that there are communities that have no internet, or they have basically dial-up internet connections. But if you're watching this show, if you're watching this live stream, chances are you have some access to internet, enough so that you can think about remote work, or you're in a community that can support remote work.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for those answers, ladies. We don't have much time for Q&A, although there is one question that stood out, and maybe you can answer it before we close. One of the audience asked, what do you think for companies who are in office setup before COVID-19? What are their biggest roadblocks to going fully remote successfully?
Well, I think there's lots of different things to think about, and I think Tracy really gave a good answer around. It's just a whole cultural mindset around setting things up in a way that are accessible for everybody. So I mean, if I were to think of some specific examples off the top of my head, it would be things like having good documentation around processes, how things work, setting things up to work asynchronously, like Marjorie said. Our people at Kinster are spread all over the world, so you have to think in a completely different way about when you might get a response to questions. It's not like just popping over to someone's desk. So I think there's just a huge amount of change that needs to happen with how they do it. And unfortunately, a lot of companies have been thrust into this position where they have to make that change very quickly, and potentially without the right support. And so that can make it tricky in a lot of ways.
Right, I agree. Tracy, we're doing
Just
a training.
Yeah,
Yes.
just as talking about documentation, we actually use, so the founder of Automatic has 5 levels of remote work. You're reaching nirvana, and we use that pyramid in so many of our talks. Like, this is the context of what we're going to reach. And it's what he references is asynchronous communication, documentation, and that kind of remote first mindset, and deliberate and intentional move towards it. So, and that actually, even if you ended up back in the office, but you thought about all of your experiences a little bit more, it's still going to be a better environment for you to be working in. So it's just great to start the journey anyway. And I'm not sure, just as you said, that we're going to be at a time soon. I just have one ask of people, because we're all about action, right? And it is, if you show, we use as well the map of Automatic and where they hire, use it all the time. And then we show the careers page. If you show that to people, they're like, what? If you see their eyes, like, we can do that here. You're like, yes. And it's so for you, it's really rewarding. For them, it's really rewarding. Remote work doesn't come in through the usual channels like careers days, that kind of stuff in our local communities. So if you can spread the word and tell people about these companies, it is transformative. So if you do one thing after today, call up somebody who you know and be like, hey, did you know you can have all of these opportunities no matter where you are? That's my action. Sorry, yeah. I have to have an action in.
Exactly. Yes, that's a very good action. Share the knowledge, right? Okay, Marjorie, you're the last in the group, and then we can go ahead and close.
And I'm sorry, I apologize. What was the original question again?
The question, hold on. The roadblock. The
roadblocks, yes. I repeat everything that Zaina and Tracy had mentioned. It really is a cultural mind shift. And I'm hoping that once the pandemic is over, knock on wood, people don't forget those lessons and realize, because ultimately it's about finding the best talent for your company. And Automatic has an advantage in that we can source talent from anywhere in the world. We're not limited to San Francisco, New York, London, Paris. We literally can go in the Philippines, in people's backyards, and hire and not require them to relocate or leave their family behind. And so companies have to think about that. You're not just competing anymore with the companies down the street or in the same city. You're competing with companies around the world. If you want to succeed in the future, you're going to have to think, how can I make sure that I'm able to attract the best talent? And so you have to think globally now, not just locally.
Yeah, totally agree. Completely agree. Thank you so much, ladies, and you for attending, for sharing your knowledge with us. I'm sure this is a real eye-opener to most people who are attending. Before we close, I'm just going to say that we will do a closing. I will be back after this. That's just so that people don't leave, right? Don't leave yet. I will be back. But I want to thank you three for the amazing talk. And I will see you around. If anybody wants to connect with their companies, you know where to find them. We will leave the links, and that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.